As a way of centering us in our time, I want to share with you Psalms 15, and I'll be using the NRSV. O Lord, who may abide in your tent? Who may dwell on your holy hill? Those who walk blamelessly and who do what is right and speak the truth from their heart, who do not slander with their tongue and do not do evil to their friends, nor take up a reproach against their neighbors, in whose eyes the wicked are despised, but who are honored, those who fear the Lord, who stand by their oath even to their hurt, who do not lend money at interest and do not take a bribe against the innocent. Those who do these things shall never be moved. Hello, I want to welcome you to Hobson UMC on YouTube. I am VHD Jr. I am the pastor here at Hobson, and I'm in with for my weekly conversation with my son Trey, as he helps me to transition from my time of study and reflection to move towards sermon preparation. He helps me to put some context for the message that I will be sharing with the congregation, and to give a little different perspective, and just an opportunity just to be able to check in with one another. And so we are delighted that you have decided to spend some time with us, and that you are listening. And it is always our hope that we say something that might be a source of inspiration for you, may bring you comfort at a time where you need that, or may challenge you to look at the scripture that we have in a different way. But most of all, we just hope that you understand how we appreciate that you are spending time with us, and that means that the big part is that you are. We're praying for you, and you're praying for us. So I just want to welcome you. And if there are things, I say this, and you all have kind of dropped off from that. I think you all took a break around Christmas time when we took a break, and so I haven't heard from you all other than around birthdays. But if there are things you want us to talk about, please do not hesitate and let us know, because this is not only for us, not only for me, but it is also for you. So once again, let me thank you for spending some time with us. A big part whenever we gather at Hobson is the time that we spend in prayer and sharing with one another those things that are upon our hearts, and those joys that come, and then those concerns that we are offering up to God, but we're also offering it up for one another. We give God thanks for the gift of intercessory prayer that links us together. That in doing so, we say to God, and not only God, do we want you to intercede on our behalf for some situations that we might be going through, but also we want seeing that we want to be used. So if there are ways that God can use us to answer the prayers that we offer up, that's important for us. A big part of our celebration is celebrating birthdays of those of whom are part of our community or connected to our community in a very special way. So we like to celebrate. We like to celebrate birthdays. This past Sunday, boy, we had a difficult time, but eventually we got to some. We got to some, and so this week on our birthdays, I want to start out with sending our birthday greetings to Jane Hicks. That's Pam Hicks's mother up in West Virginia, and we will be joining with her in sending up great birthday wishes for her. And then Ed Grimes, who checks us out from time to time, an old classmate of mine, dear friend Cleatrice McTorry, another childhood friend who listens to us, Regina Faye Martin. Well, I call her, well, she was a Fuller when I was growing up, but Jewel Walker, Cabra Bryant Tyus, Kimberly Miller, my favorite power forward of all time, Reverend Thomas Hunter, Heather Woods, Wayman Buggs, Beth Page Thompson. And while sending out birthday, I just want to also congratulate her. She's, for the last 2 years, has been working to become a spiritual director, and she completed that this past week. And you want to send a shout out to her and congratulate, and know that she'll be wonderful at that. A wonderful voice in this community, Lawrence Tomlinson, Joyce Helm, Teresa Franklin Hill, Reverend Gleason Rogers, Patricia Toddy, Shirley Odie Gooding Butler, Isaac Okuraba, Lanisha Tinsley, Joy Bronson, Mike Stewart, Dana Crutcher, Trey Collier, good friend of Trey Dixon, Martha Wetterman, Neil Darby, John McFadden, Reverend Napoleon Harris, Brittany Hamlin, Rosetta Davis, another preacher on the list, Brandon Mason, James Thrillkill, Doris Rogers, Mark Burson, and Gail Kinzer. I want to just send out, if you know those folks, send them a shout out this week. Ask that you, some very special prayers that we're asking for. We lift up the violence that is taking place within our community. There are certainly some high-profile cases that are going on for people, and in the midst of that, as that's talked about, it certainly brings up emotions within our community. We're praying for the city of Memphis and as they deal with the killing by 5 police officers in Memphis, and as they wrestle through that. Then the weather this past week, and while we've had a lot of destruction of property. It's caused by the severe weather and tornadoes that have gone through, particularly in Texas and in Louisiana, but in other places where there have been destruction. We're just asking for prayers in the midst of already a difficult and trying time for people to have these acts. So we're lifting them up. And just continue just to pray for us as a people, and praying that God will use us to answer prayers rather than to create the reason that we are praying in this time. We ask for special prayers for those who are in our community who are grieving the loss of a loved one. Continue to ask you to be in prayer for the Abernathy family. As they continue to make adjustments, and we've got some people who are dealing with some health challenges. Young friend Alexis Marks asked for prayers, and for my good friend and colleague Edwin Sanders, who is recovering from surgery, but ask that you continue to keep him in prayer. If you have some prayers that you want us to be in prayer for, then please do not hesitate to reach out and to let us know, because we believe in the power of prayer, and we believe that it's an extraordinary gift that God gives us the opportunity to be able to pray for one another, particularly in these times where we are marked more by how divisive we are. We certainly believe that we cannot pray for one another and be as divided as our community wants us to be. Our scripture for this week comes from Matthew's Gospel, the 5th chapter, and we'll be reading the first 12 verses, and I am sure they are very familiar to you. And I'll be using the NIV translation this week. And now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on the mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach to them. He said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were born before you." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, Trey, as I said in our reading, these are some very familiar verses for us. They are so important that a lot of the readings we have in the lectionary only appear once, maybe every 3 years. But there are several times that this verse will come up, even already this year. Even though we're just newly into it, it's already been a part of readings for twice for us in the last couple of months. So everyone has heard it. Everyone is familiar with this, and I was talking to some colleagues earlier today, and we were talking about our sermon preparation and getting ready for this Sunday, and particularly because it is. I will say the ones that I were talking with were male, and they were more interested in the football that is going to be played this weekend, and certainly we will talk about that a little later, because I know that you've got a team that will be playing this weekend. But a couple of them said, well, it's familiar, and I've done it, and, I haven't spent a lot of time because I will probably go and pull one out before and share it, because most of the people of whom have heard this message have already, as soon as you start, have already kind of made up in their minds what it is all about, and maybe they remember a time when they heard it, or it has become so familiar with it to them that they don't even think about it anymore. I must admit that as I was reading it for myself this year and a part of my own study, that what stood out to me as I read it this year, and I kind of shared this last week, is that as you're looking at the story, I think you have to look at the overall story of what Matthew is telling, and how he starts the story and how he moves through the story and carries through. And for Matthew in sharing, these really are the first words that we hear from Jesus. Now, we heard last week just some as he extended the invitation for the disciples who were fishing, some of them to come and to follow him, but not a whole lot about, who he is, what he's about, or, what he's been, his great message. And a lot of times we tend to think about our opening press conference in the background of this. A lot of people have talked about the new general manager for the Titans, and they're going back to what he said at the press conference and the message and all of the things that he conveys. But in this case, and with Jesus, Before we even get to the message, Matthew lets us know that this one of whom we were and anticipating that would come and would be the leader, the one who was coming after John, who was going to take up the mantle of the movement that John had created, this one who would be the one that was going to lead to a new kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven. That he doesn't start out by giving us a whole lot of message and making great speeches. That he starts out, and the story lets us know that he's going around and he is healing people. That he is in the street. That yes, he has called some people, but his attention has been and his focus has been in connecting with the people of whom he came for. A lot of times, in particular this past week, there have been several issues that have come up. Talked a little bit in the opening about down in Memphis and what is happening, and last week we talked about legislation that is impacting or will impact Nashville. And it's interesting that as people were calling and saying, who is it that we need to call? Who is it that we need to address these issues? They were all of the names that seemed to be popping up were people who already had particular leadership positions. Even in the case of they were talking about in Memphis and what needed to happen in Memphis and how they need to respond immediately. People say, well, has anybody called and talked to Ben Crump, as if somehow Ben Crump is the only person, the high profile person that comes along and to speak to the issues. And I am sure that there are those of whom are looking for and creating communities, and if we were looking and trying to organize and say, okay, well, we need to organize, and we're going to start a new church, as a Methodist, and let's say, the conference said, boy, we've got this area over here, and we just need our churches. Our churches numbers are not where they are. We're not sure that they are relevant for the people anymore, and we need to get some new blood, some new energy, and we need to start a new church. And I've been, involved a couple of times when some conversations of when that took place. And I remember the conversations was there, and how I was invited to those conversations were because I was already a leader in a church, and wanted to ask in the consideration, would you give some time and be on loan to be able to help as we build these new communities. And I'm sure that that there were probably some that when Jesus was on his way to this new community, that there were probably those that told him, say, you need to check out this person and you need to check out that person. But certainly he turned the tables on them, particularly when you consider, the first people that he called to say actively come and be involved with him were not high church folk. They were out fishing and doing some other things, but he saw some extraordinary gifts. But even for the people of whom he was creating and had come for, that he was going to people who were in need. And so now that we have this gathering, and this first gathering, and many say, his inaugural sermon, this sermon that is up on the Mount, that I am one who believes, that he didn't offer the entire sermon, that there was probably Matthew over the course of time put some things together, but to kind of give an overall synopsis of what he was going to be about. But I do believe that in that first message, that as we hear it and as he started it out, was the way that he started, because he looked out in the crowd, and I would imagine that Simon and Andrew and John and James, who had kind of listened to him and talk about this movement, looked out at that crowd and say, "We're gonna start something with these folk. These folk got some issues. These folk have got some problems." And I mean, and the problems are kind of outlined, as you listen as he goes. These are people who are poor in spirit, people who are mourning. They are the meek. They are the ones who are hungry and thirsty for righteousness. I mean, this is the crowd. But I believe that in assembling that crowd, that Jesus wanted the people to know and wanted us to know that he came for the people who needed him, the people of whom had been the victims and who had been marginalized and disenfranchised, and the people who had been excluded from the community, that Jesus came. And that in coming to them, he did not just come to them and seeing them as those who are outcasts and those of whom, had nothing to offer, that he looked at them in a different perspective. And what I think he really wanted them to know is that how I look at you is how God looks at you. And so we have these phrases are blessed, and blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are those. And you kind of think, how in the world can the people who are going through stuff seem blessed? I mean, if you're going to bless somebody, you're going to bless them with giving them, great wealth and property. Bless them with a new job. You just look at, when we can look at people and say, "Oh boy, they are blessed and highly favored." And we normally look at the people of whom have the material, but Jesus wanted them to know that they are looked upon and that they have a blessing that the world cannot give them, that they have the blessing of knowing that God is concerned about them. And I like to look at it and not looking at it from the standpoint, of saying, blessed in that terms. I like to often, when I'm reading and sharing it, and probably will do it on this, is that Jesus is saying to those who are poor in spirit, I want you to know that yours is the kingdom of heaven, because to God you are beloved. To God you are my child. To God, God cares, and God will not forsake you in the moment. That yes, you may be hungry and thirsting for righteousness, but the one who can provide that is the one who is calling you beloved. See, it's not just me, and I'm sure that, some in the crowds have probably heard, the voices that came up when he came up out of the water and how he was when he was baptized, that Jesus wanted them to know that they too are there, and that God was so concerned about them, that God sent God's self to them, to let them know that as it goes on, and for those who are the peacemakers, to say that you are children of God. And in the midst of all that we're going through as people, and we've got some people of whom, as I look at our own congregation and look at our own community, we've got some people who are dealing with some of those same issues. But it is good for us to know in these times that while there are others that are focusing and thinking, okay, we got to elect the right person, or we got to come up with the right program or direction to be able to move us in the right direction and to bring us some relief, that we have a God who loves us and who cares about us. That is with us and wants the very best for us. And so therefore will be providing us with the opportunities. And I think what another key part of it, and I'll close with this, is that Jesus, in bringing them all together, says that it is in the togetherness that we will ultimately receive those things that we need. That yes, that there are those who mourn, but it is the community that brings about the comfort. That yes, there are those of whom are being persecuted, but it is when others stand up and stand with them that we end up forming what Jesus says is the kingdom of heaven, where we all belong. See, when we all belong, we're all there together, then the persecution stops. If we're all on one accord, and we're all working for the same thing. And that's what Jesus says, is that I came so that might be real. But also at the same time of saying that this happens, but he also gives them the warning that when you start claiming those things, and when you claim them because of him, that people will indeed insult you and persecute you and say all kind of evil against you. But you can rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward. And I think of no greater reward than to be claimed by God, and that my life here and my life wherever life takes me is in the hands of God. And so Jesus just wanted them to know that as he was talking, and as others might have been interpreting for him what was going on, that what Jesus was saying, look, I see you, I know you, I came for you, and you know what? You got it going on because I got it going on, and we got it on because we belong to God. Blessed are you because you are beloved. Amen. Well, I would say how are things going, but I see you're having difficulty in getting the television hooked up. So
no, it's all good.
Yeah. So how's your day been?
It's been pretty good, man. No complaints. What about you?
It was a pretty good day. Dropped Mason off, and then went to IMF, and then did a IMF Zoom call as I went to pick him back up. So he got to listen to some of that, so he was happy. So and got to go to McDonald's. So he had a good day, so I had a good day. Yeah. So
Yeah.
well, it's a couple of things that I have been thinking about, and I'll show you. I'll try to explain later how they might tie into where I am going, or where I would like to go on Sunday. And that is, and I asked you this earlier about. Well, first of all, what do you think about your team? And you all are lining up. Are both of the games on Sunday?
Yeah.
And you all are the first or the second?
We at 2:00.
Okay.
So I guess the first game.
Yeah. So you're excited about that?
Yeah. I think it's gonna be a good game. There is something to be said about the last two teams on each side fighting for an opportunity to go to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So, to just kind of see how it plays out, and we definitely have the same style of play on the offensive end, where we both like to run the ball, and our defense is ranked high. And I mean, that's generally how it happens. You don't have teams that have those high rankings that don't make it.
Right.
Yeah. So just to kind of see how, you know, everybody everybody has their opinion about how man it's going to be the 49ers or it's going to be the Eagles. Well, you know, we'll know soon enough.
You know, that I know you have a good friend that's a 49ers fan.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm sure you all will be texting throughout on Sunday.
Right.
But when we were talking about it, I asked you earlier about Donovan McNabb and whether or not you thought he deserved to be in the Hall of Fame.
Right.
And part of the reason I asked you that is that I was talking to some because we were talking to some other friends about football today, and of course we were talking about who's going to win, and everybody's saying the great quarterbacks that are in and playing now and the style of play. And going back, and even earlier when we were kind of looking, and they were talking about some statistics. We got all kind of statistics going on. That when you're looking at play now, and you go back and you look at what he did compared to where the level of play is now, and the things that they're doing, that a lot of people are not evaluating, they evaluate what they currently see. And not putting it in the context of what was going on, in the period of time that they actually played. Because with the wide open, style of play now and people throwing it up and down, you think, the Patrick Mahomes and the Joe Burrows are that. And so I just wonder, in your evaluation, you were kind of hesitant,
Sure.
And what was your hesitation? Or are you one of those that say, okay, well,
Well, I mean, so I watched Donovan McNabb play from a fan's perspective, and knowing some of the quarterbacks that are in the Hall of Fame and what they were able to accomplish, I just don't think he accomplished enough to be considered to be a Hall of Famer. And I mean, and it's kind of tough for me to say as a fan of the Eagles, but he didn't really do a lot, in comparison to those who, may have won Super Bowls or MVPs or, those kind of things. I just don't think he was on that same wave as them.
Yeah, and because what, in the other conversation, we were talking about, folk like, Jim Kelly's in, and he went 4 years, but he didn't win it, and something could be said about that. And, Marino went his first year.
Right, yeah, he
and
sure did.
Never went back,
He sure did, yeah,
but yet people would look, based upon, what he did. But the times were different, so I was just asking. And then part of it is, also in that conversation we got to talking about, in basketball, very seldom do you hear people talk about who are Hall of Famers. That it's now just kind of limited to, who are the GOATs,
Right, yeah.
And maybe on some extremes, they will say, well, nobody will say that Kareem is the greatest of all time, but they used to say, well, he was a great scorer, because he had. Now LeBron is getting ready. LeBron won't have the championships that Michael had, but certainly he will have, the playing, the scoring. He's bound to get that. But then you look at it and you say, well, anybody plays 20 years, 19, 20 years should, at the level that he has. So,
right. Yeah.
So are those considered? And I was thinking, and I'm putting that in part of in the context is because I was also having this conversation, and when we're talking about some of the miracles and the things that Jesus did, and I made a comment because I was talking about what I was going to do with the message, and I said, Jesus probably had, a couple hundred people out there that he may have been talking to that were on the side of the hill, and that kind of gets lost in the day because, everybody was talking about, it were over 1 billion people that tried to get tickets to see, Taylor Swift or whatever her name is, and going in. That sometimes that, the miracles of going in and creating some things get lost in comparison to the things that we're doing today. And so, I just wanted to hear to you, how do you honor the context of when something was done?
If we're talking about sports and we're kind of still staying on that same kind of wave, it's, how do you rank against your contemporaries? What does that look like? How do you measure up? I'll go back to Donovan McNabb.
Right, okay, yeah.
I don't think that he measures up to a lot of those names that you mentioned, like Jim Kelly and Dan Marino.
But he wasn't. Who was his? Who were the contemporaries? I mean, who
of Donovan McNabb? Well, we can say in the NFC East, right? There would be Tony Romo, and I don't think Tony Romo is a Hall of Famer.
But was McNabb better than Tony Romo?
I think they accomplished about the same.
Yeah.
Donovan McNabb reached the Super Bowl.
Right.
But I mean, he didn't win it. Eli Manning, who did go to the Super Bowl twice.
And Eli, I mean, if you kind of pull him out, the fact that he won the two is kind of puts him up there, and I think if you look at his history, is he a Hall of Famer?
Yeah. I would give Eli Manning the nod for the Hall of Fame.
Okay.
I mean, just given him winning 2 Super Bowls.
Yeah.
I mean, how many quarterbacks can say that they did that?
Yeah.
So you would have to.
But okay. Like, one of my pet peeves is that they were talking about some receivers. He caught so many balls and he had 1,000 yards.
Mm-hmm.
He had 1,000 yards in 17 games. That to me, when I was growing up, they were playing 12 games. 1,000 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Then meant you had to average something like 80-something yards a game. Now you got to average 57 yards a game. So it's a lot. And when I look at like at basketball, I grew up in and my center was around. My big timer fan was when they had Detroit and everybody. You were hand checking, you were throwing folk down. Now you can't touch them. The receivers, going back to the football, McTory, my dear late friend who's gone on. But I remember talking to him about, you came across the middle. I mean, if the guy got back up, you feel like you were a failure. You're supposed to lay him out. They were supposed to come and get him. Now you can't touch them as they go across the center. You're free up. So that's what I'm saying. When I look at even though Terry Bradshaw, won 3 Super Bowls?
Yeah, I think so.
Something like that, 3 Super Bowls. Right. Terry Bradshaw probably could make a team today.
Right.
So if I was looking at him today and had to vote on him, I'm looking, is he in a Hall of Fame with Patrick Mahomes? Oh, no.
Well, I mean, that position evolved. The quarterback position has evolved from, the Terry Bradshaw to Donovan McNabb to Patrick Mahomes. I mean, there are some timeless quarterbacks that I'm pretty sure that you could name. But as, time moves on.
My favorite quarterback of all time, when you look at his stats and his stuff, I mean, even now, when I first started watching football and following football, if a quarterback completed 50% of his passes, he was great. Now they talking about these guys, oh man, 65, 67%, he went through the game, he had 72%,
Right.
That was just kind of, well, what's the difference? You catching the ball, but the way the game was played, running backs,
Sure.
of going through the line and getting beat up and going. I even look at the standpoint that, my favorite running back of all time is Earl Campbell. Heck, he carried around 30 pounds of shoulder pads. I look at these guys today, they don't have, so it's just.
Well, I mean, okay, I looked it up. So here are the quarterbacks that are considered to be
contemporaries of
Donovan McNabb's contemporaries. Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Dante Culpepper, Michael Vick, Phillip Rivers, Drew Brees, Brett Favre, Ben Roethlisberger, Steve McNair, Eli Manning.
Okay, is Steve McNair a Hall of Famer?
Nah, I mean, he won an MVP, but you got to think what besides that year, was he better than, or was he better than any of those people that I've named so far?
Well, I mean, if that's it, then it's going to be, Tom Brady gonna mess it up for a whole lot of folk in that era because he won so many Super Bowls during that period of time. Phillip Rivers. Phillip Rivers got great stats, but didn't win.
Right.
So is he a Hall of Fame?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think you can put Phillip Rivers in the Hall of Fame. Let me see who else is on here. Drew Bledsoe, Alex Smith, Chad Pennington, and so Aaron Rodgers is considered to be his contemporary. So Tony Romo, of course, we already named. Kurt Warner. So quarterbacks that actually won, you gotta tip your hat to that. And I couldn't with a clear conscience and not being biased because he's one of the best Eagle quarterbacks ever, say that he deserves to be there just because of that.
Well, as I say, part of what made me think about that is that, particularly when we are, when we are challenging, when I'm, challenged of dealing with illustrations that, and putting them in some context for people to be able to say, I looked at this passage and I looked at the people of whom, and I was trying to equate the people of whom Jesus was sitting there looking at, what would a similar type of crowd look like today? And so that's what just kind of got me to thinking about that. So I just wanted you to, kind of help me, and I do think that looking at it in the proper context. That's one of the things I say all the time, and part of the reason I say I have this conversation with you is to help put it in context. That a lot of times if we're trying to, compare, apple to oranges, it won't come out the same thing.
Right,
A great apple is a great apple, and a great orange may, if you don't like apples, then never gonna pick it over the orange if you don't, so that's where I was going.
Okay, well let me ask you this before we get out of here.
Okay.
So who's going to the Super Bowl? What two teams are going to be in the Super Bowl?
Well, both of my choices that I will be pulling for to go to the Super Bowl, both of them are directly you're responsible for both of them. I'll be pulling for the Eagles, and I will be pulling for Kansas City. And part of the reason of pulling for Kansas City is because Andy Reid used to coach for the Eagles, and you kind of got me to following the Eagles and catching on with him, and so. And so that's who I'm rooting for. But I tell you what, when you're talking about putting things in context, man, that Joe Burrows, that it's something special. It's something special about him, and with that high ankle sprain and Superman, I know they're gonna have him doped up, but we'll see. But I'm pulling for Kansas City, and I'm pulling for the Eagles, because I'm sitting here looking at your Eagles shirt. I ain't no dummy. I ain't gonna come in and say I'm pulling for San Francisco.
Yeah. So, all right.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for spending some time with us and indulging us as we talked a little football and sports, and getting ready for this weekend. We had to get all of that conversation out, and hope that regardless of who you are pulling for, that you have a good weekend with that. I do want to just double back and just ask you to be in prayer, particularly for the violence that's taking place, whether it's out in California with the mass shootings that took place out there, or with the violence that took place down in Memphis. Some challenging times, and we need to be in prayer for one another. And so, thank you for spending some time with us. And take care and be well.